A scream fractured the comms channel. Raw, broken, unmistakably human. The kind that carved itself into memory. Then static. Then silence. Captain Rylan Varric didn't move. His eyes, cold and unblinking, were locked on the tactical holomap hovering before him like a ghost of impending death. Patrol Wing Theta had vanished. 7 corvettes and 87 lives, gone in less than 20 seconds. The feed from their sensor logs played on a loop in the dim command chamber, over and over, like some cruel joke left by the universe. One moment, the Zavari cruiser floated in near-dormant orbit, its plasma vents cold, its hull scarred and quiet. The next, it exploded with a lightless fury that ruptured the very laws of physics. The kind of weapon that didn't just kill, it unmade. Theta Wing never stood a chance. Details, Rylan demanded, voice low but laced with an edge that could cut titanium. Still processing, sir, replied Lieutenant Enla, her fingers dancing over glowing keys. Preliminary analysis suggests subspace folding arrays, possibly precursor-based. Whatever hit Theta, it bypassed shields, struck inside the hulls. Implosion vectors are unprecedented. Rylan's jaw tightened as he turned his eyes to the viewport. Beyond the reinforced plasma glass lay the expanse of Bastion Prime's outer zone. Jagged debris tumbled lazily. Fragments of ships, frozen bodies, pieces of lives now dust. He could almost hear them knocking on the hull. Silent, desperate, gone. A tremor ran through the command deck as a distant impact ripple struck the defense grid. The station's shields flared briefly, like the flick of an old match, before settling back into their spectral hum. The Zavari cruiser had not moved since the attack. It hovered there, silent, threatening, patient, observing. It had made its move, and now it waited, as if daring them to respond. Rylan knew the type. This wasn't a frontal assault. This was psychological warfare, probing, testing. The kind of maneuver that only came before something far worse. This was just the knock on the door. Seal the outer rim gates, he said calmly, though every nerve in his body screamed to lash out. Initiate protocol, Warden. There was a beat of silence. A technician turned, pale, trembling. Sir, Warden hasn't been activated since... I know, Rylan said, eyes still locked on the dark silhouette outside. But I also know what that thing just did, and I won't lose Bastion Prime to a waiting game. Execute the protocol. The deck shuddered again, this time not from any outside force. It was the walls. They were awakening. Bastion Prime was more than a station. It was a fortress world. In orbit, one of the last remnants of the first expansion's military architectures. Its outer defensive walls were kilometers thick, forged from compressed neutronium infused with precursor alloys and interlaced with weaponry so advanced, most of it was incomprehensible even to the engineers who maintained it. They didn't just serve as bulwarks. They were deterrents, monuments of annihilation. From a distance, the walls appeared like immense concentric rings orbiting the central station. But as they powered up, their true nature became terrifyingly clear. Weapons arrays emerged from beneath ancient plating, some, slowly, like the yawning of a slumbering titan, others unfolding with a deadly elegance that suggested far too much intelligence. Rylan watched as dormant power conduits lit up like veins in a god's arm. Magnetogravitic acceleration lines hummed to life. Subspace resonators calibrated themselves with a vibration that could be felt in the bone. And then came the voice. Warden protocol initiated, it said from the station's core AI interface. Designation, Deterrence Absolute. Are you certain, Captain Rylan Varric of the Bastion Command Authority? The voice was human, eerily so. Not the sterile flatness of traditional synthetics. It was calm, deliberate, almost weary. Rylan turned toward the voice without flinching. Yes. Confirm. Confirmed. Warning. Deterrence Absolute is not a shield. It is an extinction-class protocol. Civilian casualties in adjacent sectors may be unavoidable. Do you accept responsibility? He inhaled once, sharply. I do. With that, the great walls began to shift. Not just opening, but rotating, reorienting with planetary precision. Targeting data streamed across the holograms like a storm of glowing rain. They weren't preparing to repel a threat, they were preparing to erase it. The Zavari cruiser still hadn't moved. No weapons fire, no comms, no energy surges. It was waiting. Rylan narrowed his eyes, stepping forward to the primary viewplate. "Before the collapse," he said, mostly to himself. "They warned us about building weapons without conscience, about how walls could become cages if we forgot why we built them. But these walls? We didn't build them to cage ourselves in. We built them to teach monsters what fear looks like." Before we jump into this epic tale, subscribe to HFY Nova Chronicles for the most intense sci-fi battles, legendary warriors, and universe-shaking wars. Don't miss out. Hit that subscribe button and join the fight. Then, like the closing of a noose, the walls locked into firing position. One of the weapon arrays, labeled Judgment Axis, aligned its core. An impossibly dense particle beam concentrator that harnessed the magnetic flux of a dying star. Another, the filament harp, hummed as energy strings stretched across subspace. A weapon designed not to pierce, but to slice reality itself. Still, the enemy did nothing. Rylan didn't hesitate. Fire. The wall responded, not with a blast or a roar, but with a whisper. A fold in space. A bending of what should not be bent. Light seemed to stretch, freeze, then collapse inward. The first strike struck with no visible impact. The cruiser was simply gone, erased from the holomap, from sensors, from space itself. No explosion, no fragments. Only a void where something had been. A murmur echoed across the command deck. Some wept, others stared. No one spoke. Rylan did. Scan all sectors. Look for any response signatures. If this was a probe, they'll know we've answered. Multiple warp signatures detected, Enla said, voice dry and brittle. 17. No. 21. All Zavari. No identification beacons. Vectoring toward Bastion Prime. Rylan stared into the stars, his reflection staring back from the glass. They saw. Good. Let's make sure they understand. The walls began to reconfigure, rotating to acquire new targets. He didn't blink. He didn't smile. He just whispered, "We're done building fortresses. From now on, we build messages." The stars above Bastion Prime seemed to ripple, like the surface of a disturbed pond, as the 21 Zavari ships dropped from warp. Each vessel emerged with a thunderclap of space distortion, their hulls bristling with crystalline antennae and protruding energy veins that pulsed with cyan light. They were not designed for beauty. They were expressions of pure, cold functionality. Warships engineered by a species that had never needed mercy, only efficiency. Their forms were asymmetric, as though grown rather than built, with hull plating that shimmered in layers of semi-organic polymer alloys. An eerie combination of mineral and meat. But Rylan Varric had seen them before. He'd fought them at the rings of Gradan 5. He'd lost comrades to their gravitic impalers at the Battle of Eros Line. And he'd survived the siege of Tethergate when most thought Bastion Prime would fall. What he hadn't seen, until now, was them hesitate, because the Zavari had seen the wall fire, and it terrified them. "They've formed a perimeter," Lieutenant Enla reported, her voice steadier now, analytical. "Standard Delta flank deployment. But they're maintaining distance. 7 light minutes out. No weapons hot. They're probing us again." "Then they're not here to avenge the lost ship," Rylan muttered. "They're here to observe the fire." He turned his eyes back to the tactical display. It showed more than just position markers. It revealed the ripple patterns of space-time around the outer wall after the discharge. The region wasn't just hot. It was torn, bent, saturated with exotic particles that didn't exist before the blast. Quantum ghost trails, tachyonic draglines, and something else. Something still undeciphered. "What did we fire?" Rylan whispered, not expecting an answer. But the AI responded. The weapon deployed was Origin Lance, Power Core, Fragmentary Singularity. The effects observed are consistent with local entropy inversion. The target was subjected to null state reversion. Enla frowned. Null state, as in pre-reality? In simpler terms, the AI said, it was made to never have existed. A silence fell across the bridge. The implications were more horrifying than any explosion. This wasn't a weapon of destruction. It was a tool of erasure. And the Zevari had realized that now. They weren't simply rethinking their strategy. They were recalculating their entire doctrine. Ryland stepped away from the console, his boots echoing faintly on the metal decking. He looked toward the stars again, but his mind was no longer focused on the enemy ships. It was looking back, decades ago. He remembered the construction of Bastion Prime. Not the polished version shown on military documentaries, but the hidden layers, the buried truths. How the walls were not just assembled, but grown in zero-G birthing cradles using precursor tech humanity barely understood. How the AIs were not coded, but uncovered in quantum fossils left behind by a civilization older than the Milky Way's core. How the entire idea of defense had been slowly twisted by fear into something darker. Something absolute. Because humanity hadn't always needed walls, but they had learned, brutally, that the stars were not kind. The first contact massacre at Gliese 581d had changed everything. 1,000 colonists flayed alive in a matter of hours by an alien intelligence that fed on nervous system impulses. The Second Reclamation War against the Zaru mine chain had cost Earth 30% of its oceans. And then came the silent Bloom, the event that wiped out every living soul on HD 189733b without leaving a single corpse. Only shadows, burned into stone. After that, walls became a necessity, not just physical ones, psychological, technological, doctrinal. But the walls of Bastion Prime were different. They weren't just built to protect. They were designed to retaliate, autonomously, permanently. The idea had been controversial, even heretical in early military councils. Who builds a wall that thinks, that watches, that waits? But the memory of those deaths, the silence in the wake of annihilation, made the answer clear. Humanity had been prey long enough. Ryland turned back to the command center. "Send a wideband transmission to the Zevari formation," he said. "Plain language, no encryption." Enla blinked. "You want them to understand?" "I want them to know." She nodded and tapped the interface. Ryland spoke, his voice low but steady. "This is Captain Ryland Varick of Bastion Prime. The wall you witnessed is not the last. There are 12 more across the coreward frontier, each armed, each waiting. We will not pursue. We will not invade. But if you cross this threshold again—" He paused, letting the weight of silence carry the rest. "You won't die. You'll never have existed." The message was sent. For a moment, nothing changed. The Zevari ships remained in formation, their hulls flickering as they calculated 1,000,000 permutations of war and consequence. Then, one by one, they began to withdraw. No flares of drive ignition, no panic, just a cold, calculated retreat. A quiet acknowledgement. They feared the walls. But Ryland wasn't relieved, because fear was only the beginning. He looked again at the battle data. The energy signature left behind by Origin Lance was still changing, mutating. The local vacuum density had shifted. Particle interaction ratios were declining. It was as if reality itself had thinned in the aftermath of the weapon's use. "Sir," Enla said, frowning at her console, "we're getting a resonance echo from the firing site. Same quantum frequency as the vault cores beneath Bastion Prime." Ryland's heart skipped. The vaults, buried chambers of precursor artifacts humanity had never dared to awaken, were sealed, dead. Until now. "What's the signal saying?" he asked. Enla stared at the screen. "It's not in any known language, but it's repeating one word." She turned toward him slowly. "More." Ryland felt a chill spread through his veins. The wall hadn't just fired a weapon. It had sent a beacon. And somewhere, beyond human understanding, something had heard it. The deep layers beneath Bastion Prime had not stirred in over a century. They were catacombs of silence, sealed, sanctified, forgotten by most, and feared by the few who still remembered what lay within. When the alert first pinged through the internal archives, the station's lower AI strata barely recognized it. The signature didn't match any hostile intrusion or environmental threat. It was older, deeper, buried not in code, but in the bones of the station itself. Captain Rylan Varick descended alone. He passed through 16 biometric locks, walked beneath arches constructed of alloy older than Earth's crust, and entered the core shaft, an elevator that dropped through 7 kilometers of fortified shell before reaching the subquantum vault levels. These were the places maps no longer marked. The places even war didn't touch. The places where precursor tech, uncharted, unspeaking, waited behind neutron-sealed vaults. The lift hissed open in silence. Darkness swallowed the corridor beyond, broken only by the thin violet glow of activation lines pulsing along the walls. They hadn't glowed since the day Bastion Prime was finished. Ryland's boots echoed softly on obsidian plating. Each step felt like a trespass, the kind of place that knew you were there, and remembered. At the end of the corridor, a chamber bloomed open like the center of a shattered sphere. 12 vault doors formed a ring, 12 chambers, each built to house something humanity had neither built nor fully understood. Ryland's eyes settled on Vault 9. It was open. A perfect hexagonal aperture had formed in the surface. Molecular seams dissolved without sound. And beyond that yawning space was the pulse, a slow, low-frequency thrum that bypassed the ear and resonated in the bones. Ryland stepped closer, compelled by some quiet gravitational force, until he stood before it. Inside Vault 9 floated a sphere. Black, featureless, silent, but alive. He'd seen it before, in photos, ancient scans, forbidden documents passed down by the architects of the first walls. They had called it Evum Nullum, the Forever Engine, a device recovered from the wreckage of a dead moon orbiting a black star in the NGC 4622 spiral. It had been inert for millennia, studied, scanned, feared. Every attempt to probe it had failed. Tools corroded near it. Quantum sensors scrambled. People who stayed too long near it forgot why they were there, and now it was active. The sphere hovered midair, pulsing softly with a gravity that bent the light around it. As Rylan approached, his neural implants buzzed. Static. Then, voices. Not in any language he recognized, but raw impressions, concepts without sound, emotion without words, echoes of thoughts unspoken. He fell to his knees. Visions crashed into him. The Zavari, not just now, but hundreds of them, thousands, fleets larger than any Bastion Prime had ever faced, moving like locusts across planetary systems. But these weren't invasions. They were reactions, answers to a signal that had called them all. Other species appeared in his mind's eye. Some organic, some mechanical, some whose forms defied Euclidean geometry, all converging, not toward Bastion Prime, but toward the pulse, the origin. The wall had fired once, and it had rung a bell across space-time that could not be unrung. The Evum Nullum was not a weapon. It was a doorway. Ryland collapsed forward, gasping, drenched in sweat, heart pounding like a war drum. The visions faded, but the impressions lingered, like ash after a fire. "Captain," the AI's voice filtered through the comm implant in his skull, soft and filtered through distortion. Multiple anomalies now forming across sectors 12 through 20. Spacefold tremors, unmapped, not Zavari, unknown origin. Ryland struggled to his feet. How many? 14, with 3 more emerging. 14 breaches, 14 entities, possibly more. Estimated arrival time? Minutes, maybe less. Ryland's thoughts raced. The wall hadn't just scared the Zavari, it had awakened the attention of something else. Something that had been waiting, watching, maybe even imprisoned. He remembered the old military prophecy, half a myth, passed around in whispers at deep command levels. The stars are not silent. We are the ones who have been muted. He turned from the vault and sprinted back toward the lift, calling up to the bridge. "Alert all combat wings. Initiate Bastion Protocol 4. Enla's voice came back tense. "Sir, that's full lockdown and reality stabilization. That would collapse 10 AU of navigation corridors. We'll isolate every allied system for weeks." Ryland didn't blink. "Do it. Now." He ascended back to the command deck just as the first distortion ruptured into real space. No ship emerged. Instead, it was a shape, a lattice, miles wide, organic but metallic, constantly rearranging itself as it hovered just beyond the orbital edge. Scans couldn't classify it. Light didn't reflect properly off its surface. It cast shadows in directions that didn't align with any source. And then another came, and another. By the end of 60 seconds, the system had 9 intrusions, all different, all vast, all silent. "They're not communicating," Enla whispered, hands frozen above her console. "No signals, no emissions. They're just watching." Rylan knew. They weren't scouts. They were judges. The Origin Lance hadn't been a warning shot. It had been a message carved into the fabric of the universe, screaming, "We have learned to erase." And the galaxy, maybe the cosmos itself, had come to see what kind of creature would dare to build walls that could unmake. He stood before the holomap and spoke to his crew. "Humanity spent centuries learning how to survive. Then we learned how to endure. And finally, how to strike back. But now we face something older. Something that's been waiting for us to reach this threshold." He looked out at the impossible structures floating beyond the void. "They're not here to conquer. They're here to judge whether we're a mistake worth deleting." And behind him, deep below the station, the Evum Nullum pulsed again. Brighter. This time, faster, as if answering a voice that called from the other side. The orbit of Bastion Prime had never been so quiet. And yet, the silence felt more threatening than any barrage of kinetic slugs or gravitic mines. The judges, the entities, hovered without movement. 9 vast constructs eclipsing stars, their shifting geometries rewriting the very laws of perception. Not ships, not weapons, something beyond classification. They pulsed not with energy, but intent. The first impact wasn't physical. It came through the minds of those aboard Bastion Prime. Crewmen collapsed in corridors, clutching their heads. Engineers dropped tools, staring at phantom patterns that crawled across their vision. Enla stood rigid at her console, her pupils fully dilated, her breath coming in short gasps as if she were drowning in vacuum. Rylan gritted his teeth as the sensation tore through him. Not pain, but understanding. Thoughts that weren't his own. Ideas that invaded, dissected, catalogued, judged. The Evum Nullum was humming now, the pitch rising, vibrating not only through matter but across fields of potential. It existed not just in the here and now, but across probability space, like a musical note that had always been playing. The wall, the real wall, wasn't the physical barrier of Bastion Prime. It was the idea of Bastion Prime. The concept that someone, somewhere, had dared to build a defense not just of metal and mass, but of meaning. A message to the cosmos. We will not go quietly. And now, that message had called down the response. "Report," Rylan barked, staggering as the weight of foreign cognition pressed in on his mind. Enla's voice came in gasps, distant, her focus fraying. "They're not emitting, but the field patterns around the entities are producing waveform intrusions across multiple dimensions. They're not scanning us. They're mirroring us, mapping thought, possibility, identity." Another console sparked. An AI subsystem collapsed under the cognitive load. Data fractals began forming on displays with no discernible code source. Just symbols. Recursive. Endless. The ship's AI stuttered into the comms. Warning. Non-local. Time dilation increasing. Probability collapse threshold at 73%. Events no longer deterministic within 6 AU radius. Rylan steadied himself against the command railing. Reality itself was destabilizing. But the wall had not yet spoken. He opened a channel to the core. Prime command to Vault 9. Prepare. The Lance. There was no response, because the Lance wasn't waiting for orders. The entire station vibrated with the resonance of something ancient and unspeakable. A harmony that twisted the gut, that filled the air with a taste like burnt ozone and salt. In the distance, space tore itself open. A chasm of unlight bled into existence behind one of the entities. Not a portal, a wound, and from within emerged a structure. Not built, not alive. A concept given form. It resembled a spiral, a fractal lattice of impossible size, rotating, not just in 3 dimensions, but in ideological ones. As it entered real space, every shipboard clock stuttered. Time folded around it. Crew members saw flashes of lives they hadn't lived, alternate paths, memories that weren't their own, the past, the future, and the now merged like layers of glass. And within the center of the spiral, a shape, like a black eye, watching, judging. "Sir," Enla screamed, her voice raw. "The EVM is interfacing with the spiral construct. Signal convergence is rising. The wall, it's responding." The wall wasn't firing this time. It was speaking. A wave burst from Bastion Prime, not in energy, not in particles, but in structure. A reshaping of space-time fabric, a declaration that refused to be ignored. Everything in the system bent around it. The judges froze mid-shift. The spiral paused its rotation, and the voice came. Not words, not sound, but meaning. "You built a fortress at the edge of chaos. You dared to hold the line. Now, the line looks back." Every member of the crew felt it. In their thoughts, in their history, their fears, their triumphs, their pain. The wall was not just a machine. It had become something else, fed by human experience, by sacrifice, by centuries of war, and the need to protect not just bodies, but memory. Bastion Prime had awakened. Ryland stared as a second spiral began to form beneath the station, not descending from elsewhere, but rising from within. Born not of alien origin, but of human will. Constructed from the digital soul of the wall itself, made of data, of steel, of pain. It wasn't a weapon. It was answer. The judges moved. For the first time, they reacted. The entity nearest the station shimmered, its surface warped, flickering through states of matter and unmatter. And then, it changed form, splintering into a constellation of polyhedral constructs, each rotating around a singularity core. Light curled toward it. Space began to convulse. Was preparing to strike, but the wall did not retreat. Within the heart of Bastion Prime, the Origin lance ignited. But this time, it didn't fire outward. It fired inward. A beam of pure reality collapse tore through the core of the station, not destroying it, but transforming it, rewriting it, upgrading every circuit, every alloy, every line of code. The entire fortress became a cocoon, glowing with impossibly structured light. And from that shell emerged the true form of the wall, a weaponized idea. A fortress with no center. A machine that spanned quantum thought and material design. Bastion Prime became the vanguard construct, the first of its kind. No longer just a wall to keep danger out, but a truth that shaped the battlefield itself. Ryland felt the weight lift from his shoulders, not because the danger had passed, but because now he understood. The wall had never been about protection alone. It was about identity. Humanity declaring itself not as prey nor predator, but as something new. The judges faltered. Their constructs began to realign, their resonance distorting, uncertain. They had come to test humanity's right to exist. Now, they questioned whether they could withstand what humanity had become. And in the space between those thoughts, a new force stirred. One that neither side had yet accounted for. Because when the wall awakened, something else did too. Something deeper. Something older. And it was coming. The moment the Vanguard construct fully emerged from Bastion Prime, it was as though the very fabric of local space bent in reverence, or terror. What now hovered in the void was no longer a station, no longer a place to return to after battle. It was a living monument to defiance, forged in silence, hardened by loss, and awakened by necessity. A new kind of entity, part fortress, part intelligence, part myth. The judges hesitated, not a motion detectable by sensors, but a delay, measurable in the sub-quantum rhythm of their lattice shifts, a break in their once perfect formation. For the first time since their arrival, the judges evaluated instead of enacted. But the wall did not wait. From the Vanguard construct bloomed a halo of light. Not explosive, not destructive, but disclosive. Reality peeled like a chrysalis around it. All ships in system, human and alien, saw it. A shimmering cascade of layered symbols, geometric thought made visible, cascading outward across the stars. Not communication, revelation. Because the wall wasn't just responding to threat. It was delivering a verdict. What humanity had built, what it had become, was not a mistake. It was inevitable. Across the spiral reaches of the unknown structure, reactions fired like synapses. The great black eye at its center contracted, then dilated, like a pupil stunned by sudden insight. And then it did something that made every sensor aboard Bastion Prime seize with contradiction. It knelt. Not in gesture, but in gravitational alignment. The spiral reoriented, the entire structure bending downward relative to the Vanguard construct, its central axis now orbiting Bastion's position like a vassal circling its sovereign. The judges began to change. One by one, the towering constructs rotated in silence, their strange architectures melting into symmetrical patterns, more coherent, more understandable. What had once been impossible to define now became strangely familiar. One became an armature of sweeping rings, resembling the deep orbit defense halos used by the old Terran Union. Another reconfigured into a vertical column etched with runes, not unlike ancient Earth languages, Sumerian, Egyptian, digital, and one, hovering, closest, folded itself into a shape almost humanoid, towering like a colossus above the planet below, its surface reflecting not stars, but memories, scenes, moments from human history, wars, births, breakthroughs, flickering across its skin like a living archive. Enla stood in awed silence beside Rylan. "They're copying us." "No," Rylan whispered, eyes wide. "They're honoring us." But awe was short-lived, because in the shadow of reverence came the third arrival. The tremor was felt before it was seen, a gravitational anomaly so deep it warped local time metrics by seconds. Then space split, not torn or cut, but peeled, as if something massive had been layered beneath the skin of the universe itself. And through that fold came something beyond comparison. It had no shape. Not even the wall could fully render it. It was absence given direction. A coldness that made void look warm. The true other. No judge. No spiral. No intention of balance. This was the erasure. The consequence of summoning attention from a cosmos that still carried scars from its own beginning. A being, or force, that existed not to decide, but to consume decisions. A reset mechanism. The final editor. The thing that came not when life erred, but when life tried too hard to matter. The spiral pulsed violently, its structures realigning in defense posture. The judges shifted again, now not observing, but preparing. Even they were afraid, and the wall screamed. Not in sound, but in force. A backlash of conceptual shielding rippled across local space-time, embedding fortifications into the vacuum itself. The Vanguard construct began forming tendrils, each one a ribbon of structured gravity, lashing outward to anchor to nearby asteroids, stellar currents, even magnetic nodes within the planet's core. The wall was locking itself in place. AI final stand. Inside the command deck, Rylan felt his chest tighten, not from fear, but from awe. Because he understood now. Bastion Prime had always been more than a shield. It was a wager. That somewhere out there, in the vast unfeeling dark, someone, or something, would eventually ask, "Are you worthy of the fire you carry?" And humanity had answered. The erasure loomed closer. It cast no shadow, but it absorbed intention. Across the Vanguard systems, predictive models collapsed. Every action imagined was nullified before it could be taken. Decision-making algorithms froze. The wall could no longer anticipate, so it remembered. Rylan stepped into the neural chamber at the heart of the command spire. The final key, the living core. He lay down and let the construct wrap around him. A moment later, his mind was not his own. He became the wall. He remembered Earth, the first contact war, the orbital mass drivers that carved Mars in half, the voices of the refugees who built bastions stone by stone in the dark, the child who left a poem in the wall's databanks, the engineer who died alone, welding the final breach after the Zavari nearly broke through. Every sacrifice, every defiance, every echo of humanity's refusal to vanish, and in that memory, the answer formed. The wall did not attack the erasure. It did not retreat. It unfolded. A new layer of reality peeled outward from the vanguard construct, one crafted not from metal or data, but from story. A universe, written in defense. The erasure faltered, not because it could be defeated, but because it had never encountered an idea that defended itself. The concept of humanity, of persistence, of pain, of beauty found even in extinction, fought back. The erasure recoiled. It faded, not destroyed, but denied. And when it vanished, the stars breathed again. The spiral dissipated, its message delivered. The judges turned once more toward Bastion Prime, and bowed. In the silence that followed, Rylan awoke in the chamber. Alone. The AI whispered into his mind, soft and proud. We did not build a wall to protect what we had. We built a wall to show the universe who we are. Rylan looked out at the stars and smiled, then let them come. The wall doesn't just protect, it remembers, it answers, it destroys.